and welcome. New studies have put the growing Indian consumer market at about 100 million. Now, the question, of course, is how big is the Indian consumption universe, if you want to call it that? How much has it grown? What is the real buying power? And what's changed, more importantly, and also what's not changed? To discuss this, I'm joined today by Haresh Chawla, partner at True North, one of India's most experienced and respected private equity funds. Now, Haresh has been following the consumption space very closely, both as an investor and as an observer and a writer in the past, and has sort of successfully segmented what India's consuming class is like and how we should better understand it, particularly from 2 or 3 points of view. One is, let's say, for someone who's trying to get a lay of the land. Second is, if you're launching a business into this space, how should you be looking at it? And equally, what are the mistakes that you could make? And also at a time like this, when perhaps there is a little more hype than reality, how should we be segregating, literally the wheat from the chaff? So, to discuss all of this, I'm happy to be joined once again by Haresh. Thank you so much on the Core Reports weekend edition. So Haresh, thank you so much. And let me start by asking you very broadly, when we look at the segmenting of the consumer and all that, and we'll get into some detail on that, but what's an anecdote that you've seen, or what's an anecdote that comes to your own, to your mind and from your own experience on how this market has evolved and changed? And I say market, I mean the consumer in a very broad sense.
Thanks for having me, Govind, here. Great to meet you again. I think one of the biggest anecdotes one has seen is this, and I've written about it a bit in 2016 when you go back to the India 1, 2, 3 story. One of the big anecdotes is when you see India was going to be a place where modern retailing was going to take off. We had unorganized retail, we had Kirana stores. And I had even then talked about that beating a Kirana retailer is very difficult because he can service you in a way that no organized player can. And that story is virtually played out in the same way. Organized retail has really not taken off in India after so many years. And it's serving only India too. Actually, if you look at a retailer, let's say DMart, massively successful company, brilliantly run business, but who does it serve? The India 1 customer, and the customer that the Goldman Sachs report talks about, or all the these affluent Indian reports talk about, does not end up going to a DMart. So where is organized? They've all gone to the Blinkits, the Instamart, the big baskets, or they're going to reorganize Kirana shops that have reinvented themselves, have got massive self-serve stores, or even grocery chains, which are, let's say, a Nature's Basket kind of, which are actually very small. But if you see what's happened here, that the game to be played at the top of the pyramid is very different to be played in the middle of the pyramid. And the bottom of the pyramid is continuing to be a challenge for us. That it's a massive base of essentially non-consumers. They don't really participate in the economy. But as you see what's happened really, everybody thought that India 1 will, India 2 will become India 1 and India 1 will go to modern retailing. But the other thing around has happened, that companies realize that India 2 needs bulk discounts. They're trying to live on a budget. They need to save money. And that's where DMart's success story is playing out, actually.
Right. And can I ask you to, for those who are listening and may not have heard you before, what is India 1, 2 and 3?
See, India 1, 2, and 3 are virtually, when you look at India as a market, most markets in the world are homogeneous. India is a very heterogeneous market in multiple manners. In the way a family that's been brought up conservatively in, let's say, south of India will behave versus a Punjabi family in the north are very different, even though they have the same level of income. So that's one difference in how they consume. The second difference is that we behave and act like 3 different countries. The bottom is actually sub-Saharan Africa. Virtually trying to subsist and stay alive and survive. And we've seen how they need to be actually supported with,
like we have a food gain program
food programs, DBTs, many other things.
Rural employment.
Yeah. So, and we've done an excellent job of raising them out of poverty, but they still are not able to climb any ladder. The ladder is not even visible to them. And then there is India 2, which behaves like a middle income country actually. And that's what middle India is all about. And there is India 1 that behaves like it's living in Europe. And the amazing thing is that these are not separated geographically. In the same city, like we are in Bombay and we see, 80-story skyscrapers. and next to the Chawls and next to the Hutmans actually. So India 1, India 2, India 3 are actually all together in one melting pot in the cities. So people get off from their BMWs and Mercedes and go to a 5-star hotel, and their chauffeur is probably an India 2 person who's got his family. He's earning about between 25 to 35,000 rupees a month. Probably has an earning child as well who's contributing to the family income. And then there is somebody standing on the side of the road who's unable to get a meal.
Right. Okay. So now there are projections about this affluent India, as we call it, or the $10,000 per capita income.
Yeah.
So break that down from your perspective and the transition that you've been seeing or not seeing in the last 8
one
years.
of the challenges I have with these reports is that per capita as a phenomena is not relevant in India. We don't have individuals spending, individuals buying. We should be doing per capita household actually, or per household income. That's the one big difference that. So therefore, the number is never clear. Suppose the per capita income is, let's say, $10,000 or 8 lakh rupees, right? Now, if it's one single individual, that individual's disposable income may be, or fully discretionary income maybe that they'll spend on their food and their rent and the utilities, and maybe, let's say, 2 lakh rupees is the disposable income. The moment this is a family, and now you apply the per capita metric to it, and you say, okay, there are 2 earning members in it, that income becomes 16 lakhs. The cost of living doesn't change. The disposable income, therefore, suddenly jumps from 2 lakhs to probably 8 or 10 lakhs. And that's a 4x jump. So how the household behaves is what is actually very important for us.
Sure.
And the household is the unit of measurement that we should have in India. And this is that household that actually allowed us to get through COVID as well. Because everybody had a mechanism by which they could depend on somebody else to get them through these struggles that we went through as a nation during that time. And that the resilience of that household is what keeps our economy going. That there is some or other manner in which nobody is left alone. They have either the family or the extended family to look after them. So, and I think India is unique in that sense that nowhere in the world does the household unit still survive, stay together. I mean, we've seen disintegration of that in the West as economic, progress happened. China has a different problem with their household. They probably, because of the single child policy, which has now really led to a planned disintegration in that sense, that the household unit is itself not very robust and resilient. I think India stands out as a unique example of a household that has stayed together. And actually now, despite multiple generations living together with very different aspirations and lifestyles, actually it's actually continuing to be integrated.
Sure.
And that actually goes down to is something that nowhere in the world it's been seen actually.
Right. But computationally, from saying 100 million people with $10,000 versus, let's say, 25 million or 30 million household units with, let's say, $40,000. How does that change things?
So it changes the spending patterns completely. You know what I'm saying? The confidence of the household could be very different from the confidence of the individual. Okay. See, finally, our economies are a function of how much confidence people have in spending. And I think that's one of the biggest metrics of how well an economy does. As people get more confidence in their employment, in their future cash flows that are likely to happen, they end up spending. And that, in a sense, creates a virtuous cycle of growth for the whole economy. So I think for us, it's important to understand from 30, 40 million households that have the money to spend, are paying bulk of the taxes, are also consuming a bulk of. See, one of the other policies that we have is that there are, I call it the rule of 5 to 50 now. 5% of these households contribute to 50% of consumption in many categories. So it's 5% of people who order 50% from Zomato, 5% of people or 1% of people which take 50% of the flights. So when you look at it, there is even higher concentration actually, even in that smaller pyramid. So it's an extremely dense pyramid on top. In the top, let's say 1%. And the rest, let's say 9-10%, which we are talking about. 300 million households, roughly 30 million of them affluent, earning well and spending well. But even in those, there is a question of frequency, which at the top is very high. So the first, let's say 3-4 million households contribute to 40-50% of many affluent category spends actually.
Right. So we're going to talk about trajectory because that's the important thing. But I'll come to that later.
Yeah.
So let's look at 2 or 3 things in that India 1 and 2 and perhaps 3 as well.
Yeah.
So one is the growth of credit.
Yes.
And the second, of course, is premiumization. But we'll come to premiumization in a moment. Let's talk about credit and how that's changed or fueled consumption.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, let's look at first at the India level what has happened. I think between the last decade, what have we seen? We've seen a GST being implemented. We have seen demonetization, which led to rapid digitization in a sense. We saw COVID come in. And we saw UPI and Jan Dhan and all these projects get some shape. What has really happened at India is that you can almost see the working capital cycle of India has become faster. So in a sense, you're seeing growth happen because we are faster as an economy in some sense that money is moving faster, goods are moving faster. And there is a ripple effect on everything that happens. That's one side of the story. That's internal. Externally, we are seeing that China's, let's say, challenges in COVID and therefore on the global stage have allowed some, let's say, movement of focus on India and therefore investments into India.
Right.
We've seen startup
China
funding
plus
come in.
one. Yeah,
China plus one.
Yeah.
We've seen startup funding in billions of dollars pour in. Now, whether those startups survived or not, that money actually came in. It helped people buy cars. It helped people get jobs. It allowed people to buy apartments. So that credit flow that happened in terms of an equity flow for India, your company has started speeding up. Your company got equity flows. And that also gave an confidence for the credit flow to happen. So confidence led people to buy on credit. And when you buy on credit, money is seen, by people as an exchange of value, but also an exchange of time. If I can be given a loan to buy a Swift Desire car or a Kia Seltos or a Sonet or whatever, 5 years before I could afford it, what really has happened, you advance that demand. When you advance that demand, that car starts selling. The car starts selling, it generates employment. It generates a bunch of flows from my money. So I think that's what we are seeing. And we have seen historically 2 things have happened. Household savings are at a 50-year low actually. And household liabilities are up by 50% over last year. So credit card spending, in fact, I think what we've gone to the other extreme, that when you go and buy, let's say, a refrigerator, the cash price you pay is lower than the EMI price. It's a crazy phenomenon happening, and I'm sure RBI has issued warnings on it. So we are at that unique place where we are borrowing. India 2 is borrowing actually. India 1 doesn't need to borrow. India 2 is borrowing from its future and has the confidence to borrow and is willing to work for it. So they've also seen their incomes go up. They see a bright future for them. And that borrowing is resulting in production increases today, which we're all seeing, consumption increasing today. And of course, the profit from that consumption, as we've seen in our economies, goes to India 1. So India 1 progresses by India 2 becoming more aspirational, taking more credit and consuming more. So that cycle is like this. When you talk about trickle-down economics, probably some part of the cycle is
so that credit, you talked about, the incentive to use a credit card versus paying in cash at this point.
Yeah.
But is there a subsidization happening somewhere, either by the finance company or something, or you feel that this is how the
it's a See, I
volume...
think as a producer, if I can increase my MRP and and package in a bundle in a discount for buying via credit, I will see sales go up. So I think that some part of that is happening. Excess of it is bad, of course, because then you're allowing people who actually cannot afford to take that credit and will probably default on it. In fact, credit card defaults are up at some multi-year high at I think 2.75% or something like that. So I think, is credit good for us? Absolutely. I mean, there's no question that as a country, we need to allow people to borrow and spend on consumption today, because that gets us on a different production orbit. In fact, if anything, housing loans should be even further discounted, because once a person buys a house, the knock-on effect on purchase is, you buy furniture, you buy a car, you want to buy other appliances, the whole economy starts moving. So the only thing is whether the credit is affordable and how it's recovered. I think those are some of the challenges we have to think about.
So you talked about confidence. Now, confidence usually comes from maybe it comes from 2 or 3 things. But
Yeah.
one thing that I think most economists also agree is that there's a wealth effect or a feeling of wealth,
Yeah.
which is again stock markets, gold.
Absolutely.
So 2 questions here. So
Yeah.
one is, do you agree with that?
Yeah.
And to what extent is that driving confidence? And secondly, what's the downside of it?
So I think the wealth effect in India has gone up dramatically because of land prices going up, especially in the rural areas as well, or because of urbanization, the towns have become larger. Look at a city like Pune. Bombay can't unfortunately expand, but cities expanded like a balloon. It's grown on all sides. So therefore that land has become valuable for people. Gold has become
Prices have gone up.
is gone up, and then the stock markets are at their all-time highs actually now. So the wealth effect has been very positive. Now, the only challenge with the wealth effect is when the asset prices cool off, does that leave people in a bad shape? And therefore, that comes down to the amount of leverage you have. So the good part is Indian households are not very highly leveraged actually. So unlike America, where a wealth effect can have many more, effects on the economy and spending, Indian households are not very leveraged at all. So I think our debt coverage of an Indian household is very good. So I don't think we have a challenge there that this wealth effect is going to have any deleterious or any bad effects on us right now. I think controlling credit, which you already know that RBI started unsecured lending actually, which is what a lot of equity money blew up by startups who are fintech, who gave money away for free virtually to consumers. And of course they're paying and have paid for that losses, so that money has gone to consumption. But I think unsecured lending will be a challenge that will continue for some time, and we'll have to probably tighten that as we go along.
So the Reserve Bank has already tightened that and is now hinting that it will tighten further because it's alert on this this phenomenon. But do you feel that this is something that can shift the numbers? As in, for example, without getting into whether how many millions or tens of millions, but there were a whole bunch of people who were using credit cards, or using BNPL or just swiping their cards, or even on their phone and getting a loan and then buying something immediately. But is that something that could get shaken up?
No, I think,
or will it get substituted by something else?
It will get substituted by something else. I think what is really happening is that, as I said, the one phenomena that has happened all over the world is that we've come through extremely stressed 1 year in COVID. Everything that is normal looks great right now. So I think the desire to spend has been triggered. Desire to have experience. Look at the airports; they're full. The hotels are full. The malls are full. The travel that Indians are doing all over India and globally is massive. So I think there is a certain effect that normalcy looks great now, and therefore let me spend. That's one more element in the confidence. So I think that will not go away. The second thing that happened is that exposure from the mobile phone. See, that's become the great unifier. So, it's no longer necessary to be in a big town to get access to the goods and services that the people in the big towns get. So I think that democratization is a thing that's ongoing right now in India. So you will have consumption kicking in from many. See, therefore there was never any. India is very complex to understand. Multiple levers are working in different manners at any point of time. So I think that analysis is very difficult to do. As long as we don't give any shocks to the economy. That's the bigger thing. We should be continuing to grow very well.
Right, and I'll come back to premiumization and trajectory in a bit. But let's look at the bottom end now. So, if you look at, let's say, results from companies like Levers, not so good. Companies like Nestle have done a little better because maybe they're more premium, and we'll come to that. So what's your sense on the rural? Because when I talk to analysts also, they all seem to have switched off on anything that is rural focused.
See, I think what we have to realize is that food inflation and general inflation has been very high actually, and that affects them much more disproportionately than it does you and me. So I think that's what is happening at India 3 actually, or India at the bottom of the 2, where they are struggling actually to manage their budgets. And I think that phenomena is a function of reasonably high unemployment and lower trickle down happening there. So India 1 flows down to India 2. At India 2 to India 3, what is the trickle down?
But India 3 is also was or has always been a market, let's say, for large companies like Levers or any large consumer product company. So why are they not able to address it as well as they were earlier, assuming that people still want to consume soaps and personal care and all of that, using Levers as an example?
Yeah, I think it's function of capacity to pay. and the amount they consume. So both. So they are not willing to pay very high prices, and costs have actually gone up for them. So they are actually thinking of how to limit consumption, how to downgrade a bit. The rest of India 2 and India 3 are on an upgrade cycle.
Yeah.
I need not regular yogurt, I need A plus yogurt, then I need an Epigama yogurt or whatever. I need to have Greek yogurt, and then I need to have whatever. You can't have vegan yogurt, but whatever else is the fad in the world. So that upgrade cycle is on, and that's a function of lifestyle changes, the information they're getting actually on Instagram, on Facebook. I think we are globally connected. So you launch an oat milk in America and it reaches in a year on Indian shelves. We don't even know what oats were before the Americans talked about it. Or now there is some rice milk that's coming. So unfortunately that, the India 3 is actually isolated in that sense because the ladder is missing. And that's, I think, the key challenge for the economy as to how to create social structures and employment opportunities actually. That's why vocational training or something like that, to make them part of the larger economy. Otherwise, we are not leaving them behind, because clearly there are social schemes designed for them. So in a sense, they are surviving. But how do you kickstart their aspiration and remove their fear of participating and partaking of the growth that we are seeing? All of us are children of that actually. All of us are, I'm sure when you began your career, or I began, 25, 30 years ago, where we thought we would reach. I mean, we've reached far ahead of what our imagination could have allowed. And therefore, that privilege we've had, and we should be thankful, because actually what you're seeing is what happened in China about 30, 40 years ago is happening in India now. That we are at our societal level are seeing compression of 50 years of growth into 20. India 3 needs to see some form of that actually. And that is a challenge. Which has to be solved by other things than doing a scheme.
Right, and from a marketeer's point of view, so there was supposed to be a fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, and I'm sure there still is. Is that something that, let's say, this is a very specific example. Now. Let's say companies who you would invest in. Would you think that they have opportunities still either in the consumption space, consumer space, discretionary space at the bottom of the pyramid?
My sense is that companies that are solely operating on the bottom of the pyramid, I think there'll be a challenge getting funding. And we are seeing some of that play out in the startups that tried to go there as well. So I think India 1, India 2 is where the market where monetization will happen. India 3 is where you have to sachetize everything, and there is a question of whether that is in margin accretive to the business. So I think that question still stays. That market will get added on. I don't know how many companies will say, okay, I want to address that market, because the challenges of reaching them are massive. The challenges of making money from that market are massive. So till those people get employed actually in some manner, and they start generating incomes that can on their own, and therefore you have getting them schemes which help them reach a certain level, and then they generate income. That's when it will become a market.
Right. Okay. So let's come now to the top end. So premiumization is the word of 2023, I think. Tell us about how you see this word and what it represents and what's changed and not. So in contrast to previous years.
So my sense is that everybody is finding power users in every category. Every company realizes that there is margin available to afford a international lifestyle for the top end of the market actually. It's almost not Indian in that sense, in the way they demand their service, in the way they expect product quality, and their willingness to pay. So therefore, you can go to a Starbucks and pay 300 rupees for a coffee, whereas we know that it costs like maybe $15 to make it, right? But the service, the ambience. So my sense is that the way a company would think is that if I premiumize, it helps my brand send the signals, and then I'll figure out how to make a mid-range offering. I think that's how most brands will end up doing, and we've seen success like a company like Cred, for example. I mean, in a market which is very tough for fintech companies, has put together an offering for the top end of credit card users. Or if you look at what Air Vistara is doing compared to what Indigo did. So I think you're seeing these companies start developing models saying that there is a certain high-paying and high-frequency customer. Remember that frequency is very, very important, because that suddenly changes all the math. It's very good to say that there are 150 million customers. How many of them are actually buying frequently? And the frequent buyers are the ones that are dedicated and leave profit on the table. So I think every category you're finding this shift. In foods that's happening. You're seeing a bunch of brands coming up, or the existing brands trying to premiumize and modernize. You're seeing that in retailing. I mean, look at what grocery stores have done. The Kirana store, which we thought will get pummeled by the entry of technology and modern trade, survives and thriving. I mean, you see those chaps are buying the next door shop and making the shops bigger.
Yeah.
And they know that they can serve customers well and make money. So I think it's happening across
and
segments.
there are some good examples.
So there are clothes as well. I mean, if you look at apparel, again, a company like Trent discovered Zudio as a model, right? Can I serve India 2 or India 2.5, let me call it that, somewhere there, with a very good value for money offering while keeping the whole look and feel international. So international at Indian prices is a big segment that's coming up. So it's actually, the pyramid is bloating in the middle for the clever player. DMart also, it's a bloat in the middle. Let me not try and run a premium store in South Bombay. In fact, they hardly have any stores in Bombay actually. Let me go to the cities that are emerging where customers don't have relationship with Kirana stores, and they'll come to the discount retail shop. So therefore, there is a pyramid, it's like a peak at the top. There's a big box in the middle, which is India 2, which has the money, which has the confidence again to spend, the confidence to borrow, and is willing to spend.
So now to come back, so we said, let's say the path is 100 million of $10,000.
Yeah.
What you're saying is 30 million effectively
Households. Yeah, 30, 40 million.
Now, as you look ahead, both in the context of premiumization and now the trajectory, what is likely to change versus what has changed in the last 7 or 8 years that you've been observing and writing about this sort of new consumer and the new power consumer?
So I think at the top, the numbers will stay small. I think the big impact is going to come. And numbers will stay small. The malls will come up for them. They are paying, let's say, 800 rupees for a movie ticket. They are paying 350 rupees for a popcorn. That market is there. It's high frequency.
So you're saying the percentage will remain the same or the numbers will remain the same?
My sense is that the percentage will remain the same. But numbers may grow, but not marginally. The middle is going to bloat. And I think a lot of...
so the 6-7% of the population, give or take?
6-7% of the population lives this affluent lifestyle who we will all, pander to their wishes. I call them, they are assisted living at 20. I mean, they don't want to get out of their couches. They press buttons to get everything they want. Everything is available to them. And whether it's a global product or Indian product, lands up in their hands in about 8 minutes. So that audience is small. They'll continue to spend, and I think so. Therefore, and they will trickle down. They'll earn money from the work that the rest do as well. So that, my sense at the top is about a $1.5 trillion economy. Not small. The size is big. So it's 1.5 trillion on the top, 1.5 trillion in the middle, and maybe very little left at the bottom. Actually, if you look at it, if you separate them as countries, the middle is where. See, again, you're seeing a lot of signs from entrepreneurs doing well. See, earlier, before GST, you had a number 1 do well, number 2 do well, number 3 company would, let's say, suffer or just barely make money, and the rest of the companies would lose money or compete with unorganized guys. The unorganized market really is getting wiped out. So that formalization benefits are really coming to the middle India. So formalization, the logistics improvements that are happening because GST, the one tax system, the lending that's happening to them, secured lending also. They're the ones who are buying the houses or building homes. So that India 2 level is where we can see massive growth coming. And hopefully we will even give them more credit to make sure that they can, really generate demand.
Right. So let's touch upon technology. Again, an aspect or a lens you use a lot. So how is technology, of course technology is already, and when I say technology, I include, let's say, payments and speed of payments, which you also touched upon. How is that going to change or likely to change this trajectory as we are looking at it?
See, I think one of the biggest things we end up talking and lamenting about is participation of women in India, and that our economy will only transform when that happens. Actually, one of the things that technology has done is really empowered the women in the house. I don't think we see that as something that shows up in a metric anyway. But the housewife who's really supporting the rest of the household, again, as I said, per capita is not the thing, per household. That household is thriving and surviving and is growing because she now is empowered. because of technology. She can learn things on YouTube. She's seeing what's happening in the world. She knows how to dress, how to cook, how to manage money probably. So there is this big wave of the homemakers who have been empowered by technology, who are able to run their household much better because they're well informed. They're putting their kids through better schools. They're paying more attention to what the kids are studying in school. They have the confidence to do a parent-teacher meeting. So I think that aspect of empowerment of women and becoming productive in that sense. I mean, their productivity is hidden, but they hold the whole household together, is not being seen. So I think there are other aspects of technology that all of us have talked about, that it made, it democratized everything. So person in Bombay, it's actually changed grooming, by the way. If you look at the market, the riders who come deliver to you probably have got better haircuts than you and me. They groom better. So you're seeing the salons and spa come up everywhere. And that's a function of how, as economies grow, personal grooming becomes a big market. And you're seeing many players.
You sound like you're investing in something.
No,
in that
I'm not
space.
investing in them, but I'm saying that some of these are the signals of large-scale economic growth.
Shifts.
That people start spending on themselves, how they look and feel, how they appear. You're seeing all that play out. But I thought, therefore, that's a function of technology. You see well-dressed people, you want to look like them, right? So that's one. But the role of the woman in the house and how the phone has allowed her to see and open her eyes and then use those learnings back in the home to either make decisions or participate more in decisions is lost, actually. It's not showing up anywhere.
So when we talked about premiumization, the companies that we've seen, or at least I've seen, are existing companies who perhaps do not have premium brands but have now moved into that space or are now increasingly, whether it's service products or products. Others, I'm assuming, would try to enter at that level. Now, if you were to put a slightly more marketeer's lens rather than the producer's lens, do you think it's that easy to crack this space? I mean,
one of the challenges we've seen, and we'll see a lot of destruction in D2C brands. That's what happens is technology is like a drug. You can I can send a WhatsApp, and if I put a clever enough a message, it can reach 300 million people in the next 5 minutes, right? People can circulate it and can go everywhere. The unfortunate part of it is that it's very expensive to reach them. That the gatekeepers are sitting between Google and Facebook. They take chunk of money out of the system. So, in fact, what is clear now is that you cannot virtually launch a D2C brand for the middle Indian market, because if your gross margins are not strong enough, you will not be able to afford the rent that these platforms charge, including Amazon, including Flipkart. All of these marketplaces have a fee.
30% fee.
30, 40, 50% fee. And they're designed by the algorithms to actually knock the number one off and give the place to somebody else who's willing to pay more. So we are like lemmings in a sense. And I've written about that. We are like lemmings. The next guy is willing to pay more. Even on Swiggy, Zomato, the new restaurant, if he's willing to pay a higher charge, will get shown up in the algorithm higher. So in that sense, it's very difficult to survive in that market because the cost of acquisition of a customer is really high. And therefore, which is why you see duopolies are forming actually in each of these segments, that these are companies that got well funded earlier. Of course, they've done a great execution job. But today, you can't imagine a third food delivery company, for example. Or you can't imagine a third, people are trying with it's a mobility. But these are difficult markets to get into. So the same challenge is there, that if you think digital is the way to grow, and that looks very enticing, and then we've raised billions of dollars of VC money, it's actually a very tough market. And therefore, because you need good gross margins, you will end up addressing India 1. India 1 is too small. So the unfortunate part of the Goldman Sachs story, it tells you two things. It says that we are a great market, right? But it also tells you why we are a small market. Just 60 million homes or 100 million people is a small market actually for what India has. We have 1.5 billion people. But also tells you the potential of the market is massive, because there are 1.5 billion people waiting to join these 100 million actually at some point. So it's tougher to reach these people only through technology.
Right. So then the converse question therefore is, will people or should people then be thinking of offline, and how are the economics comparing today versus, let's say, a few years ago?
Yeah, so see, one of the things I call the digital medium is it's a handicapped medium. You just see an image, a few pixels, and you have to make a series of decisions based on the pixels you see in front of you. Offline has touch and feel, the kind of conversion rate. So imagine 100 people walk into a store, probably 25, 30 of them buy a product. 100 people walk into a website, 0.5% convert. So I mean, that's the reality of, because the rest of the signals of the product, the sensory signals are missing online, right? Therefore, on offline is a much better place to be. And but again, there are challenges there. The cost of setting up the offline networks, because they're such old traditional networks, there are no modern companies that have been built in that space, actually. Most of them have failed, or unlike, it'll be a bad thing for me to say, but or are going to fail, actually. Because the networks that the stores have and the wholesale networks, the distribution networks are very, very expensive to build. And the entry barriers have been set by the incumbents. I mean, look at Nestle, Unilever, their distribution reach and control, and the ability to actually, put a big cost on a new entrant is extremely high.
So you're saying for a brand that wants to challenge, even on the slightly more premium side, in let's say the food space, will find it difficult both offline as well as online.
Online, so I think it's a question of calibrating the expectation and trying to make money. See, the issue is that if you calibrate your expectations that I will reach, a 200 million people market, and then you spend accordingly, you'll find it's a disaster. So I think which country you want to operate in has to be very clear to you. Where you win, and then where you take footsteps slowly to get in, is the way to think about it. So I think you have to be very humble. Indian market is a tough. I think it's very simple. Just because you make a nice PowerPoint, just because a trend has worked in the West, does not mean anything actually here. Of course, unfortunately, money has been flowing in, and that's a big, let's say, shift that, again, we'll have the same exuberance 8-10 years later. So it's a cycle. But I think at this moment, being humble and realizing that online is difficult, probably less difficult than offline, but offline itself is also very difficult. So I think that calibration needs to happen.
Right. So, okay. So as we look ahead now, can I ask you for one or two things that you feel are the clear upside?
And therefore, sorry, come back.
Yes.
Therefore, some companies are selling. See, companies have realized that if I build a good product, create a great following, create word of mouth, fantastic equity with the India 1, when I need to go to India 2, I probably need to send to a larger player who is not willing to, who doesn't want either have the attention or the energy to be able to launch in a small segment.
Yeah.
So
and you've seen Tata's, for example, buying...
Tata's buying Soulful, or Yoga Bar selling out to ITC. Or, some of these companies will have to do that. So again, therefore you have to design your company to have the structural margins that a bigger player feels that when they put sales and distribution, they will get growth.
Right.
If your structural margins are negative or not so good, the bigger player also is not interested actually.
Right. Okay. So as we conclude, if you look ahead on the same trajectory, maybe a year or two, what are the one or two things that you feel are going great and therefore very positive? And similarly, what are the one or two things that you feel we need to be careful or wary about?
So my sense is that on the positive side, I think there is a unlocking of the consumer's mind on buying new things. Therefore, I think there is a market. India is severely under-branded. So I think that is an opportunity that if you calibrate your expectations well, brands will have extreme success because they'll be able to serve a certain set of target consumers, right? So I think that's a big market opportunity. And therefore, people who design their businesses around that, that's going to, and experiences as well. I think Indian consumers are desperately hungry for experiences. We live in cities that have very little places to go, right? So I think people who craft or merge product with experiences are going to get make a good headway. On the downside, I think we are continuing to face this unemployment, unengaged, massive young labor force, and that is a function. I know we are trying many things. China Plus One is helping. The PLIs are helping. But I think a solid initiative is needed to make sure that, that's the only hump left in us truly becoming where we need to go. So I think simplifying the laws actually, if you look at what's happening, why can't we just give the Supreme Court $5 billion and tell them, take the money and become digital and become current, set up the court system and make them speedier. So I think the ease of doing business, and we are doing many things on that front, but I think step jumps. Can the income tax code be no longer than 200 pages, right? Can we simplify?
Rewrite the code as
Rewrite
opposed
the
to keep...
code. Rewrite the code and make sure that the system of contracts and the way you get justice. You look at how much assets are locked because of cases in the courts actually. So that whole thing is lying unlocked. And then my sense is you'll find that the investment demand, which I think we're spending a lot of infrastructure, but till private enterprises set up to create capacity across the board, we won't be able to employ all these people. So I thought two things. If we can, let's say, for example, travel and tourism, again, instead of trying to do incremental things, can we decide to have 5x the number of tourists to India in, let's say, 3 years' time? Suddenly that will generate a huge employment opportunity.
Yeah.
And for that, the country itself is vibrant and every tourist in the world has India on its bucket list. But can we ease their coming here? Can we ease how they stay, what it costs them, how much fraud happens? All that. I'm saying, therefore, the opportunities are very clear. We just need to remove friction from our systems. And that will solve a lot of our issues, actually.
Okay, last question. As an investor, what are you looking at nowadays in 2024, if there is a theme?
Oh, so I thought multiple themes in that sense. I think clearly technology changes that are happening. My sense is that we will find several traditional businesses will find a way to modernize. So I think there are companies that are finding, using technology to get ahead. So it could be in any segment. So it doesn't have to be a new business. So can we do an old business in a new way? I think that's one, let's say, because that the market is established. So nobody's trying to sell a concept.
Like a car dealership, for example.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or the second-hand car business. And I'm an investor in Spinny, and you see how they've worked their experience out very differently. So it's an old business being done in a new way. And the other trend I see is the consumption pattern shift, actually. As you can see in the food, for example, food business I'm excited about. I think we're going to see a complete change in how we eat, what we eat, and how we consume, and how much we spend on food. And that's a multi-year trend. I mean, we no longer want the dal roti. We will have probably meals that are partly prepared that we get home, right? So there is a whole change in how we'll consume, let's say, food. So that's another trend I carefully look at. But largely, I think this is a low time for startup investment. So one is being more careful. This vintage will be a tough one, actually.
Right. And perhaps a good time to study exactly
what's happening.
Yeah, right. Harish, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you.